I was completely in love with it from the minute I opened the page.
I went into the bedroom to smoke a joint. I lit it up, and I turned around, and there's John Lennon sitting on the floor.
That's what every writer is shooting for, is that #1 slot, and it's terrific to have landed there.
This is Off the Shelf, and on your radio.
This is Adam Rothberg. Our guest is Staceyann Chin. She's a Jamaican writer, political activist, and performer who is known for her one-woman off-Broadway shows, her rousing appearances at venues like the New Yorican Poets Cafe, and was featured on both the television show and Broadway edition of Def Poetry Jam. And now Staceyann has written a memoir, The Other Side of Paradise. Well, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin at the beginning. Growing up in Jamaica, you never really knew your mother, did you?
No, not really. I mean, she didn't kind of get into my life until I was about 9. I mean, she came for a visit to Jamaica. She was living in Canada at the time.
But it's quite a story. Nobody really even knew she was pregnant, right?
Right, but I think that's a common story with, women who don't want anybody to know that they're pregnant. My mother was slender. I mean, I think I was premature. I was a small baby. So.
Right. She came home one day to your grandmother's house and basically...
Out popped Staceyann, yes.
Yeah, right. But your father was absent too, right?
Yes, but in a kind of stranger way. He lived in the community, but he was not in my life. So yes, he was absent, but I knew where he was. And
so it was your grandmother who was responsible for raising you and your stepbrother during those years.
It's not my stepbrother. He's actually my half brother, as you say in America, but in Jamaica we just say brother.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but my grandmother had us until I was 9 and he was 11, and then my mother came back, and then we had to go off and have an adventure with her.
And you were desperately poor, right?
I would say yes. I would say poor, very, very, very poor. Not quite Slumdog Millionaire poor, but poor.
You were eating, yeah,
yes,
right.
Yes.
But as you describe it, you were basically happy living together, the three of you. And then when you got to be about 9 or 11, things changed, and
yes.
Your life took a turn for the worse, right?
When I was 11, I got shuffled into a home that was quite dysfunctional.
But it also seems that growing up, as you described yourself, you were very much of a squeaky wheel, a plucky kid in a culture
wheel,
that...
more like a clanging pot.
Yeah. And it also seems that this kind of ran smack up against a culture that maybe thought children should be seen and not heard.
Well, that's kind of one of the golden rules of being a kid in Jamaica. You speak when you're spoken to and answer when you're called.
And you paid for that, though, really, didn't you, over the course of your childhood?
I think I did. I think I paid for it more than the average Jamaican kid because I had less adults looking out for me in situations where, your own parent would be like, just be quiet and come here, and stand by me or something. I didn't have anybody to protect me in that way, so I often landed square, in the way or in the line of fire of someone who was hitting. Jamaica is a culture that believes in strapping kids, and I think it's somewhere in the last couple of years, very recently, that we've changed the laws that you can't hit your child, that it's illegal to use capital punishment.
Right. So you and your brother and grandmother were separated at what age was that?
I was 9, my brother was 11, and I think my grandmother was somewhere around 80 years old, or 70-something years old, I don't know, I remember exactly.
And you started to live with a series of relatives.
Yes. Yes, I went to live with my grandfather's sister, who I didn't know at all.
So you're living in all these families, and by all accounts from the book, it seems like you were pretty much treated like a second-class family member.
Yes, and I mean, in very poor families, that's kind of what happens largely, not because people are primarily unkind. I mean, although some of them were unkind, but I think it's mostly because they have so little resources for themselves that you as a kind of non-nuclear member of that family you get shafted to like the side and further
Right.
down the list of priorities.
Right, but through all that, what came through to me was how you were able to basically excel at school in spite of all these circumstances.
I learned very young. My grandmother, who could not read, insisted that I learn to read, insisted that I pay attention to my letters and that I learn to love them. And I also had a love for learning. I mean, I loved books and teachers and schools and classmates.
Right. And I was actually surprised, you write about that the national newspaper actually publishes the names of all the students who get accepted into higher education.
Absolutely. There you go, a culture that actually values children who do well.
Now, as you got older, got into high school, you moved into a new town, and it was where your father lived, and you mentioned that sort of you knew who he was, but you hadn't met him in your early years. You eventually did make yourself known to him, yeah?
I knew who my father was, so one day I just called him up on the phone, and he said, come by.
And what happened then?
It was a very difficult conversation that I think we had. He actually told me that he was not my father. He could not be my father. And it was a very kind of dashing experience for me because it hurt me deeply because I really thought that here it was that I had called him up and I was going to go and find him and he was going to say, yes, you're my daughter, and I was going to be his daughter and all of what that meant. And to just kind of go there and find out that he says, no, you're not my child, you couldn't be my child. I kind of had to kind of pull back and regroup and figure out what to do next. It was, I pinned my hopes on that for so long as a child. On the days when I need a father, I say, you're lying, and so yes, you're my father. On the days when I don't need him so much, I give him the benefit of the doubt and I say, perhaps you aren't, and you are just an extraordinarily kind man.
You were able to finish high school, and then you went off to college, and you discovered your love for theater and performing there.
Yes. I don't know if I was any good at it at the time, but I certainly loved being in this place where it was this ragtag. It was like somebody had come and like caught a can of New York and like put it in a little section of my school where you had these weird people with weird personalities who were so invested in performance and being different and being odd and being philosophical.
But also at college you came to the realization that you were gay.
Yes. And I think people are most often surprised by this because I meet so many gay people who say to me, I knew when I was 3, I knew when I was 7, I knew when I was 9. And it kind of happened upon me when I was 19. I think when I look back now and I look at how close I was and how I cried when my best friend didn't talk to me for a week and how I acted as if I had had a broken heart. But, now in retrospect, in hindsight, I can see, of course you were a little lesbian. But now, but at the time it was like I had no idea.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was difficult at the time and frustrating, but the chapter of the book where you write about sort of learning about this and then going about trying to act on it and seduce some of your college classmates, it was actually pretty hilarious.
Was it?
Yeah.
It was pretty angsty, you fall so deeply in love when you're a late teen or in your early 20s. Nothing else matters. Like the whole world is a big aching heart.
Yeah. You're also very clear that it is pretty dangerous.
Yes. Yes.
In the culture that you came from.
Yes, and I think one of the things I like about the way that I wrote the story and perhaps the way that I lived the story is that it is nuanced and that it's complicated and that it was, as you said, funny and hilarious and wonderfully eye-opening and complicated and tragic, but it was also very dangerous, that it isn't always just this huge place where it's tragic and we all get killed. I mean, it is dangerous, but I'm glad that we talked first about how hilarious and funny and great it was. But it is dangerous and it is illegal. It is a criminal act to be homosexual in Jamaica.
So you're finishing up college. You've discovered your love for theater and performing. You've learned you're gay. So you kind of realized that perhaps this island isn't going to hold you. And
yes.
you have to leave.
Yes.
You came to New York?
I came to New York, New York. I was singing this cheesy song when I got on the plane. I was like, the New York, New York song. I don't know if everybody does that, but it was kind of like cheesy, but like wonderful. And I knew that I was coming to a place where I was going to be able to like chase a woman and not like, be chased by a machete.
Right. And how did you find yourself involved in the poetry and slam scene?
I think that, as with all things in my life, grand and adult, some woman invited me somewhere. Some woman invited me to the New York Poets Cafe, and she actually stood me up that night. But I walked in, and I think Sarah Jones was doing her first one-person show there, and people were, getting up on the stage and doing this explosive performance poetry, and I just kind of rolled into it and said, I want to do that. And somebody said, well, just sign up for the open mic. And I was like, oh, my God. And I wrote my name down, and they called me up, and I did a poem, or I did a journal entry, and, somebody invited me to come do poetry somewhere else. And
so you did it the first time you went there?
Yes.
That's great.
Because there's an open mic. You can just write your name down.
So I was watching clips of your performances, and they are, I have to say, extremely powerful, upfront, honest, which I don't think will be a surprise to anybody who's listening to this interview. But when you're doing that, how much of that is improvised, and how much have you written out ahead of time or thought of ahead of time?
The poems themselves exist as text. They're kind of monologues. They're kind of poems that exist. I write them. I work at them. I work at the metaphors. I work at the punchlines, all of that. But I think the in-between stuff, I just kind of let myself roll when I'm, talking about, I'm commenting on political things or telling them what's happening in my life. So the performance is this kind of seamless melding of the poetry and me kind of bearing whatever is in my head that night.
Do you, would you feel like performing a short poem for us, for the listeners?
Let's see what we can do, this time of the day. Imagination is the bridge between the things you know for sure and the things you need to believe when your world becomes unbearable. But in this world of schoolboy bullets, biological warfare, and kiddie porn, it takes guts to believe in any god. So I practice in believing in the smaller things till I'm able to make room for the rest. I begin with believing there is a Santa Claus, except I believe St. Nicholas is a holiday transvestite, and I believe in monsters lurking under the bed because they give our children something to conquer before the world begins to conquer them, and I believe most lovers will lie to you eventually. And though I believe two wrongs don't ever make a right, sometimes slashing his tires makes you feel better. And I believe Pinky and the Brain are revolutionaries because every night they try to take over the world. Like them, I believe there will always be something to fight for. So I believe in the sounds my lover makes during sex. I believe in eating East Indian mangoes and lesbians from Montego Bay. I believe in believing every day in fists and friendships and final words. I believe birds were once people in another life. I believe our lives are often shorter than we expect. So for as long as we can, I believe we should believe in some things we don't know for sure. Acknowledge the range of possibilities, not limited by what we see. Move reality with imagination. We decide what our destinies will be.
Wow. Thank you. So, you've really been able to make a living doing this, haven't you?
Yes, only in America. Only in America.
But you've traveled the world
yes.
with your performances, right?
Yes. I have a huge following in Scandinavia, and I don't know why. I mean, if you ask me, tall, blonde, white people who were Vikings once, I don't know.
As long as it pays.
As long as it pays the rent, because New York is no joke.
Now, I just want to get back to close a few loose ends on your life here as you talk about it in your book. Are you in touch with your parents at all now?
I am in touch with my mother, yes. I speak to my mother all the time. She lives in Cologne, Germany. And my father, and I say father with such hesitation because you've read the story, so we kind of, the jury's still out on that. So the man I believe might be my father, the man who my mother says is my father. We speak all the time, but mostly about politics and about the economy and about Barack and Hillary and McCain and all those people who occupy. So we kind of talk about things that matter to us, but not things that matter to us personally.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that in a lot of families.
Well, it's good to know we're quite the normal father and daughter.
And your grandmother passed away not too long ago, yeah?
Yes, a year and something ago. And last week, actually, or 2 weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, my other aunt, who was very kind to me when I was a child, she passed away as well. So the two people who I think, were my, warmest, kindest caretakers have gone on, and neither of them have read the book, and it's very kind of sad, but I don't so much know what happens in the afterlife, but if there's any such thing, I hope that they've read it.
Well, Staceyann, thanks for being on the show. I just can't say enough about the book, not to get all gushy, but I found it the most heartbreaking, powerful, and redemptive memoir I've read in a long time, and there were moments where I wanted to get down on the floor and cry with you. So it's quite an accomplishment.
It's quite a compliment you've handed to me, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for saying such wonderful things about the book.
Staceyann Chin's The Other Side of Paradise is published by Scribner. For more on Staceyann Chin and her new book, you can visit www.staceyannChin.com or www.simonandschuster.com.